It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, May 2nd, 2025. In Los Angeles, he is Sam Park. In Reno, Nevada, I am John Ramey. We are going to discuss the Canadian election and a grip of U.S. economic indicators, which have come out after the first quarter here, and that roughly coincides with the Trump administration's time in office. So let us begin with our great neighbors to the north. Sam Park. Wikipedia tells us the 2025 Canadian federal election held on April 28th to elect members of the House of Commons to the 45th Canadian Parliament. This was the first election to use a new 343-seat electoral map based on the 2021 census. Key issues of the election: cost of living, housing, crime, tariffs, and threats of annexation from Donald Trump, President of the United States. Okay. The Liberal Party won and continued as a minority government. Fourth consecutive Liberal government, third consecutive Liberal minority government. Liberals also won the popular vote for the first time since 2015. Both the Liberals and Conservative Party improved upon their vote share and seat count from 2021. Other parties all lost ground. This is a big reversal of the polling trends from mid-2023 to January 2025, which had led to projections of the Conservatives winning in a landslide. And I saw in other reporting that there was even talk of a Maple MAGA political coalition. That is to say, a kind of somewhat reactionary or nostalgic Canadian version of MAGA. But all that went away when Donald Trump threatened to annex Canada, and they decided to stick with the Liberals.
That's right. This was an unprecedented reversal for any party in Canadian history. But it's also the first time that America had threatened to take over the country. So you can imagine that perhaps this might have caused a disturbance in the political momentum. But still, it's really remarkable and to some extent shocking. And there are so many issues at play here, but the main issue is really Donald Trump. It wasn't, as we've discussed several times on this show already, it wasn't until after he'd been reelected in last November that he started talking about making Canada the 51st state. And again, this is not something that, although it seemed to be something that he sort of was trolling people with or joking about or something like this, although he's insisted many times that he is serious about this. But it seemed sort of like standard Trump behavior. And I think a lot of Americans took it that way. But again, as we've discussed, Canadians can't really afford to take it that way. And so by himself, Donald Trump reversed the fortunes of the Conservative Party in Canada and cost them the election. I don't think there's really any other way to think about this. And I think that many, for instance, the polls narrowed slightly in the last week of the campaign, which was only 5 weeks, which I find extraordinarily refreshing, almost like a cool Canadian breeze wafting across the border. But
almost.
It seemed as though the Liberals had it in the bag almost from the get-go, from the beginning of the campaign. Again, only 5 weeks. The Conservatives made up a little ground at the end, and I think that's partly because the Liberal leader, Mark Carney, had never run for office before. He's an extraordinarily accomplished person, but he'd never held elected office before or even run for anything. And he made a couple of little missteps that I think might have cost him some votes there at the end.
Does it matter that they're a minority government?
No, again, as you mentioned, this is not the first time this has happened. And the Canadian system is modeled very directly on the British system. For instance, the only House of Parliament is the House of Commons, just as in Britain. The Conservative Party in Canada is often nicknamed the Tories, just like they are in Britain. And perhaps most importantly, it's a first past the post system
Right.
in terms of allocating the seats in parliament. And they have, you know, two or three other parties that compete in the various parliamentary constituencies or ridings, as they're called in
Uh,
Canada.
I have a
And
graphic from the BBC that we'll throw up right here just to
Mhm.
indicate where the parties are, as
Very good.
far as how many won and lost, etc.
And so the if there's more than two parties competing in any riding, then whichever party gains a plurality of the votes in that riding will win the seat. So you don't have to get a majority in any particular district. You just have to have more votes than any other candidate that's competing for that seat. So this differentiates the British system and therefore the Canadian system from other European style parliamentary democracies, which many of which are allocating seats through the basis of proportional representation. But we don't need to go into that in any detail today.
Is this now the defining political issue for Canada? Who stands up the most effectively or communicates as if they're standing up to Donald Trump? Whoever communicates the most effectively, that they're kind of the Trump kryptonite or the defender against Trump? I mean, is this now the central issue for Canada and possibly Mexican politics?
Well, it certainly is for Canada. And I think that a number of things uh, came into play here that I think are unique or at least specific to Canada, we might say. For instance, Pierre Poilievre, the conservative leader, was very much a sort of Trumpy figure. As we've mentioned before, it was very easy for the liberals to find video clips of him saying things that are very similar to things that Trump says. And as you
Maple
mentioned,
MAGA, Sam.
yeah, exactly. As you were just saying, and that didn't help once Trump started threatening to annex the country, and so uh, Poilievre, and I'm sort of disappointed that I only put this together this week. Uh, he's not so much a Canadian Trump as we might think of him. I think he's much more of a Canadian Ron DeSantis. That is,
Mm,
he's someone who tries to sort of be like Trump, but isn't, doesn't really have everything that Trump has to offer. And his hairstyle is sort of similar to DeSantis's also. I think that's really the most apt comparison. Meanwhile, Mark Carney, as we've discussed, uh, he not only instantly reversed the fortunes of his own party, the Liberal Party, but he did it by being confrontational against Trump from the get go. As soon as he announced his candidacy, he was declaiming against Trump and his threats to annex the country. And it's not just that he beat Poilievre, and not just that he did so by being opposed to Trump, but he's essentially a card carrying globalist.
right.
I mean, he was the head of two different central banks of two different nations on opposite sides of the Atlantic. I mean, it's almost like he got both his bachelor's degree and his PhD from Deep State University. I
Right.
mean, that's who this
Right.
guy is. Also, to borrow a construction of Trump's, uh, we might say he's straight out of central casting, right?
He
If you were
is. Yeah.
to show pictures of him and Poilievre to people who didn't know who either of them were and say, which one of these guys is the Prime Minister of
Prime
Canada?
Minister. Yeah.
I think 77 out of 10 of them would pick uh, Carney and not Poilievre.
Not only would they pick Carney, they voted Poilievre out. He lost his seat.
He lost his seat. Although just today it's been reported that a different conservative parliamentarian who just won his race, by the way, in Alberta, I think, is resigning, and so that Poilievre can
Wow.
take his seat in a by, or hopefully win his seat in a by-election. That's a reliably conservative riding in which Poilievre is going to be competing, and he's expected to win. And that, because he made it very clear that he did not intend to step aside as the conservative leader. And why should he? As you say, he actually boosted his vote share.
Sure.
The number of
Yeah, conservatives gained ground.
yeah, and I mean that would have been enough for them to form a government in any other election. But the issues of this election were so consequential that
It's like no
basically,
one expects a Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expects the president of the United States to all of a sudden threaten annexation. It's not in
exactly.
the conventional wisdom calculus for a Canadian election.
And as you mentioned, it's the smaller parties who took it on the chin, right? The New Democrat Party, the Bloc Québécois, who were formerly a militant separatist party in Quebec, which is, a Canadian
Are,
historical issue that we,
are they like
don't
Sinn Féin? They've become more
sort of.
mainstream,
I mean,
less
yeah,
scary.
they've become less militant,
Yeah.
for reasons that are would take a great deal of time more than we
We can
have
have
today in order to discuss.
we can have our
But
all Canada episode maybe in the summer.
perhaps, but Carney is expected to travel to Washington, D.C. to meet with Trump next Tuesday. So we might discuss that next week. I don't expect this to be an especially consequential meeting,
Right.
honestly, because the fact is, this is possibly the only instance in which Carney's political interests and Trump's align very directly, right? It's in both of their interests to be seen to be having this meeting. And
Right.
so I don't expect it to be extraordinarily eventful. It's more of a sort of meet and greet and set the table for any negotiations that might happen going forward.
Yeah, for Carney, he just needs to not score an own goal, right? He just needs to avoid a some kind of misstep against Trump.
That's right. And I think that in on Trump's behalf, it would be very important for J.D. Vance not to immediately start picking on Carney as long as nobody, starts, just
Right.
railing against Carney in the Oval Office. It should be fine,
Should be all right.
right? But you know what? If that were to happen, I think Carney would just stand up and leave.
Yeah.
That would be the play for him to make at that point.
Well, he played
But
hockey. He's not afraid of confrontation.
that's right. And now, I don't expect that's going to happen. So, this is all rather academic, frankly.
No, but again, we do have to kind of factor that in. Like we've
Yes.
seen, we have to think about it now.
Yeah. I mean,
One
the example of Zelensky is something that's going to live on for quite some time, I think.
in infamy. Um, did Trudeau just give up too early? Could he have just sat and waited for Trump to become a menace and then he could have ridden this liberal wave? I understand he was at 10 years, so he was kind of past his expiration date just in the general parliamentary school of thought as far as executives go.
I mean, people who observe Canadian politics much more closely than I do, uh, some of them have said that, right? But I think honestly, people were just so tired of Trudeau. And also, his relations with Trump specifically were very poor. And many people thought that he didn't handle Trump especially well. So I don't think that that's actually something that
Interesting.
people should spend a lot of time thinking about. For example, after Trump was reelected, Trudeau flew to Mar-a-Lago, apparently as a supplicant. And this was on November 30th. And I don't think that was the right thing for him to do. But it was only after that, actually, that Trump started ramping up the rhetoric about annexing Canada and making it the 51st state. And so what Trudeau got for his trouble was more ridicule and scorn heaped upon him. So I just don't see that there's any way he could have held out. And again, uh, Carney was the exact right person to come in at that juncture. When he won the Liberal Party leadership contest, I think his percentage of the vote was 86. I mean, he just crushed everybody else. He got, more than twice as much support as all the other candidates combined. So he had a strong mandate from his own party
Just
going
wild
in.
because he'd never run for office before.
That's right. So going into the campaign, he had a very strong mandate that Trudeau certainly would not have had.
Right. trying to think of a candidate so popular existing outside of politics and then immediately so beloved. I mean, like that's like Eisenhower or something.
It is pretty
Yeah.
crazy. And I think we would struggle to come up with any historical analogy to this development. I mean, this is,
Eisenhower didn't win the GOP nomination with an 86% share, I'll tell you that
no, I mean,
much.
this is all just, it's so anomalous that I think first of all, it would be hard to find a historical parallel, but we shouldn't make more of this than it is. I mean, because this could be an extraordinarily significant development because as we mentioned, I think last week in our episode about Trump's first 100 days in office, uh, this is somebody who has yielded an enormous political success by standing up against Trump, at least rhetorically. And it seemed after Trump got reelected that he was just cruising, right? He was, sweeping all before him. But this could be a beginning of a sort of counter Trump wave in other parts of the world. For example, after the German elections, Friedrich Merz suddenly came out, and started talking about, not maybe not the end of NATO, but a real departure from the standard defense posture between Europe and the United States. And that is a developing story. That's going to keep going as time goes on. The German government has finally been sworn in, and so they're going to start ramping up defense spending and other things as a sort of hedge against the possible departure of the United States from the European security theater. Now, Merz did not campaign that way, unlike Carney.
Sure.
But, and let's face
Trump
it,
didn't threaten to invade Germany, though.
exactly, right? And Canada is in a very unique position. They're right next door to the United States. They're a very large country. But one thing I would also say about Canada, though, is that uh, in its trade relations with the United States. Obviously, it very closely resembles Mexico because they're all in what used to be NAFTA and is now the USMCA, the United States Mexico Canada Agreement. Although in Canada, inside of the Canadian media, it's often referred to as CUSMA, the
Kuzma.
Canada US Mexico Agreement, sort of their Gulf of America,
That's
right?
punchy. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, you can say it, right? You don't have to sit there and go us, right? Or something like this, right? But
Also, it's like north to south.
yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
But apart from Mexico, Canada also very closely resembles China. Again, just in its trade relations with the United States.
Sure.
It's an enormous trading partner with the United States, and it has one of the most deeply integrated supply chains
Sure.
with the United States. And one of the things that happened in this election was that uh, once Trump started threatening to annex Canada, it awakened a level of sort of patriotism and nationalism inside the Canadian population that surprised many Canadians. Uh, whereas nationalist patriotism is not at all unusual in China. It happens all the time,
Sure.
regardless of whatever else is going on, and is ramping up very dramatically right now in the trade war with the United States, between the United States and China, that is. And so we might at least believe that China can stick this out for a while because just like the Canadian population, people in China are very upset with the United States. They don't, they feel that they're being treated unfairly, right or wrong. Now, there's many things about the Chinese trade position that I myself don't necessarily approve of, but they're clearly being picked on here, right? 145% tariffs is just absurd. And so they're sort of dancing around with the United States about what's going to happen. But the overall idea seems to be that they think they can tough it out longer than Trump can. And they're probably right about that. I think that's almost certainly the case. Mind you, the trade war with China is going to be terrible for China, right? It's not going to be good for us either. But, they've spent so much time developing these supply chains to export to the United States. And many, many businesses rely on that export trade, and they're just not going to be doing anything.
They're
And so
going to
it's,
eat bitterness.
yes, that exactly as Chairman Xi has long recommended that Chinese young people should do. But China is not at all shy about state intervention in their economy. They will take measures to make
Right.
sure people don't get laid off, for instance, from state-owned enterprises, or for that matter, they'll lean on private enterprises to just not lay off people if they can avoid it. And they'll figure out some ways to compensate those businesses for keeping people on the payroll, perhaps at reduced pay. But again, they feel like they have more stamina in this situation. We'll see if that's true. I would tend to imagine that they probably are. I saw a uh, journalist from the Financial Times on television yesterday. His name is Robert Armstrong, and the he was saying that the investment markets here in the United States are betting on what they call the taco trade, right, which stands for Trump always chickens out, which I
Ah,
thought was
taco.
very good. Yes. So uh, uh, now again, we shouldn't make more of this than it is, but if I think that there's some validity to the parallel between the Canadian position and the Chinese position in this case.
To economic data here in the United States, the Associated Press reporting the U.S. economy contracted for the first 3 months of 2025 on an import surge at the start of President Donald Trump's second term in office as he wages a potentially costly trade war. Gross domestic product, a sum of all the goods and services produced from January through March, fell at 0.3% annualized pace, according to a Commerce Department report Wednesday, adjusted for seasonal factors and inflation. This was the first quarter of negative growth since quarter number one of 2022. Consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, Sam, are a recession, correct?
Well, that's a sort of rule of thumb that many
So we're
people use.
so we're halfway to kind of the street definition of a recession.
That's right. The National Bureau of Economic Research uses a rather more complex formula for determining these things. But
Fine.
many people feel as though two consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth does count as a recession. But uh, as you were mentioning, uh, the main reason for this is simply because so many imports were flooding into the country uh, in the first 3 months of the year because
To
Trump was
beat
saying
tariffs?
there's going to be tariffs. And so importers were trying as hard as they could to get ahead of the tariffs and bring in as many non-perishable goods as they possibly could. And
We
so
have we have a stat on that. Would you like
okay,
the
but
stat?
but but before we get to that, the point is that imports always count as a negative factor in determining gross domestic product, right? So if you get an enormous surge of imports, it's not at all surprising that GDP should fall.
So this might be somewhat a distorted negative picture of GDP simply
Ex-
because of the surge of 41.3% for the quarter.
yes,
Imports soared by 41.3% for the quarter, for the biggest growth outside of the COVID pandemic since 1974.
yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, right? I mean,
Okay.
you should expect that would, that's going to have a negative impact on gross domestic product by
I mean
definition.
that's interesting. So the actual negative consequence of a trade deficit is negative GDP data.
Yes, that's
We
right.
finally found something wrong with trade
Yeah, I mean,
deficits.
exactly. As much as we make fun of Trump, justifiably, mind you, for basing his whole tariff formula on trade deficits, it's not like trade deficits are just great, right?
Sure.
It's
But it's a
not.
bookkeeping thing.
Exactly, right? I mean, you can't expect to never have a trade deficit. And that's where this whole thing comes into question. If all these countries are negotiating with Trump about trade going forward, if the quote unquote problem being solved is that they have a trade deficit, what is there to negotiate? I mean, that's just something that's going to happen. That's a symptom, right? That's not something that is, a glaring problem that needs to be fixed. You just have to start making more stuff in your own country, and your trade deficit will go away. By the way, if both exports fall and imports fall, the trade deficit might not change at all. It's
Right.
just that people will make less money.
Right. Uh, a slowdown in consumer spending, this is from the same report from the AP, and a sharp decline in federal outlays also contributed to the weak GDP number.
Yes, the government spending is also that is a positive
That's right.
factor in GDP. If you cut government spending, GDP will also fall.
Okay. Let's also touch on consumer confidence and the jobs report. Okay. So the AP reports American employers added a surprising 177,000 jobs in April as the job market showed resilience in the face of President Donald Trump's trade wars. Hiring fell slightly from 185,000 in March. That's revised 185,000.
Revised
But it
down,
is,
by the way.
yeah, it is above economist projections of 135,000. So, yeah, 42,000 extra jobs. Unemployment rate remained low at 4.2, according to the Labor Department reporting today. Consumer confidence. AP reporting Americans' confidence in the economy slumped for the fifth straight month to the lowest level since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, as anxiety over the impact of tariffs takes a heavy toll. Conference board said Tuesday that its consumer confidence index fell 7.9 points in April, its lowest reading since May of 2020. Nearly one third of consumers expect hiring to slow in the coming months, nearly matching the level reached in April 2009. Not a sunny time, if memory serves, when the economy, that's my insertion here, the AP says, when the economy was mired in the Great Recession. Okay, so people are still getting hired, but they're gloomy. And the negative GDP number might just be because of the glut of imports that might not be a very insightful metric right now. Is that right?
I think that's right. And also, one thing I noted about the jobs report is that one area in which jobs were added to the tune of about 30,000 or so was in warehousing and transportation. So that's really just kind of a reflection of the import front loading, right? All the imports that were coming in the first 3 months of the year, it's not like they instantly appear on store shelves, right? All
Right.
throughout the month of April, they still have to be trucked around to warehouses so that they can appear on our shelves. So
It's like the retail sector spiking around the holidays.
exactly, right? And so the impact of the tariffs probably won't begin to be felt until later this month and more so throughout the summer. That's assuming that they stay on, which we don't know if they will. I think quite a few of them will, though. And so we can expect that they will dampen economic activity to some degree. I should say, though, and I think we've mentioned this before also, that uh, the United States economy is not just the world's largest economy. It's deep, broad, diverse, right?
Is it the world's most diverse economy? It must be.
I think it has to be, right? I haven't seen any data on that, so that's just a guess, right? But just about any kind of economic activity that you can think of is done in this country, and there are very few other countries about which we could say that. And
Right.
so, again, I think the Trump trade war and the tariffs, et cetera, are a terrible policy. But the United States economy is extraordinarily resilient. So the idea that he's going to destroy it, I think, is probably wrong, especially given the taco trade, right? Because we know that deals will be made, the tariffs will be reduced. I don't think they're going to go away, though. So it's not like it's going to destroy the economy. It'll just put a damper on things for no good reason.
And also, it does destroy our standing, trust, prestige in the world.
Yes, and that I don't think will be reversed. You can take the
Right.
tariffs off if you want, right? But nobody's going to. I mean, for instance, if I were yesterday, for example, Volodymyr Zelensky or his representatives signed the minerals deal to help, advance Ukraine and United States relations, right? I mean, if I'm Zelensky, I don't really care, right? Just
It's
like what
not worth the paper it's printed on.
exactly, right? Just like what you made a deal with Trump. It's not like Trump's going to honor that. As soon as he thinks it's going to be in his interest to renege on that deal, he'll do it
He
in a
will,
second.
of course.
And so, I think any country would do that with the trade deals that they're about to make. Just, fine. What's the least bad deal that you can make, and then hope that you can figure something else out in 3 years. I think that's about 4 years. Right. I think that's basically the way this is all going to shake out. Meanwhile, the United States will have just shot itself in both feet.
Any other thoughts on the economy and the grip of economic reports that are coming out this week?
Well, just to sum up, right? I mean, for instance, Trump said, I think yesterday or perhaps 2 days ago, that this is still Biden's economy because he was getting bad numbers, right?
Was the jobs report Biden's economy or Trump's economy?
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure he's going to take credit for that. But the point is, this first quarter after Trump takes over, I'm willing to call that a transitional quarter. Right. I mean,
Sure.
Trump didn't take office until the 20th of January. He didn't get his whole cabinet confirmed for another month or so. You have
Liberation Day wasn't until the 2nd of April.
exactly. But I think by calling Liberation Day on the second day of April, that is the second day of the second quarter, he gave economic analysts, he did them all a great favor, even amateur analysts such as ourselves, right? It's just like you might as well say, I own the economy from the second quarter on. Now, mind you, he already said that even the second quarter will be partly Biden's fault if it's bad, right? But I don't think anyone's going to buy that, right? If you spend weeks going Liberation Day, Liberation Day, Liberation Day, it's going to be huge. It's going to be fantastic, right? And then all of a sudden, everything after Liberation Day is terrible. No one's going to say that it wasn't his fault. No one will believe that.
I wish I could.
Some people will believe it,
Yeah.
but for the most part, I think people are going to say no. You hyped this for weeks, and now it's all on you.
He's a con man. He'll find somebody else to con.
Yeah, I
I
think
mean,
that's
this
right.
is a guy that's been stiffing workers for the better part of 50 years and
Yeah, I agree
keeps
with you,
keeps moving up the ladder.
but that we already know that he's losing political support because of these
Yeah.
policies.
Yeah, I guess his con is so ubiquitous. He's run out of kind of untilled groups of people to con at this point.
Well, not just that, but this seems, as we've mentioned, this seems to be the only thing he actually believes, right? This might be the only sense in which he's not trying to pull something over on anybody. For example, to return to the Canadian election, as soon as Carney became the candidate, Trump backed off a lot on the annexation rhetoric. And I think someone explained to him, look, this guy's succeeding by opposing you. This makes you look bad. But on another level, I think he might have just listened to, like, for instance, Carney said over and over again, our relationship with the United States is over, right? The gradual deepening of ties and trade and military cooperation is just over. And I think to some degree, Trump might have heard him say that and said, at least this guy understands what I'm trying to do. Because, very few people have gone that far out to explain how this works, right? And I think Trump would agree with him. It is over. I'm trying to remake the entire world order.
Okay. Next week we'll talk India, Pakistan.
Yes, and India, by the way, is also on this very short list of countries that are said to be nearing a trade deal with the United States. I gather there are some hitches in that today. We'll see how that works out. Also,
Where's that on
Australia.
the list of 200 deals that'll be
That's
done?
like that is when I say short list, I mean like two. The other was Japan. Also, Australians are voting right now, and that election will end tomorrow. And next week will be the first meeting of the Federal Reserve's Open Market Committee since
Of an open market
Liberation Day.
committee. Yeah,
Yes,
that's
so
good.
it's going to be an action-packed episode next week.
All right. Well, rest up over the weekend, everybody. He's Sam. I'm John. Have a great one.
Thank you all.